Without further ado, Cynthia, would you please take it away?
Thank you, Brent. Very kind of you. I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's program. We have a great audience here at St. John's Episcopal Church, and hopefully we have a lot of people on Zoom. And I'm glad you can all join us. As a reminder, the Geologist of Jackson Hole has a long-time partnership with the Teton County Library and the Library Foundation. And GJH programs are part of the Science and Nature Tuesday series, Tuesday evening series that usually takes place in the library and which we hope to be back to soon. But meanwhile, I would really like to thank St. John's Episcopal Church for hosting us here for our live events until we can return to the library. So first, I'd like to start and introduce our next program. The next program will be on Tuesday, October 5th, titled Hydraulic Fracturing and Its Impact on Water Resources. This will be presented by Dan Creighton, who is also the treasurer of the Geologist of Jackson Hole. So thank you, Dan. And this program will be by Zoom only because Dan will be out of town. So please remember that, Zoom only on October 5th. Okay, now I'd like to move on to introduce our speaker tonight. And I'm really pleased to have Dr. Carol Frost here. And here's a little bit about her background. She grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. She earned her bachelor's at Dartmouth College and then her PhD at the University of Cambridge. She's been on the faculty at the University of Wyoming since 1983. And in addition to that, from 2014 to 2018, she was Division Director for Earth Sciences at the National Science Foundation in Washington, D.C. In 2019 to 2020, Carol served as the Mineralogical Society of America's 101st president. And in 2020, she became Professor Emerita with that organization. Carol is an isotope geochemist and petrologist. Her research focuses on the origin and evolution of the continental crust, granite petrogenesis, and application of isotopic tracers to environmental problems in general. And as a final reminder, for those of you on Zoom, if you have any questions, please direct them in the chat feature to John Heberger. Thank you very much and welcome, Carol.
Well, thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. I don't know if you know, it has taken me 2 years to get here because 2 years ago, there was a snafu of one kind or another. And then the next year there was a pandemic. And so finally I'm here and it's a real pleasure. And it's especially nice to have some of you here in person. It's easier to talk to people you can see, right? Not to say anything against all of you 22 people that I can't see, right, who are on Zoom. Now, I've noticed that you all tend to butter people up pretty substantially, giving them lots of compliments. And so I thought I would just let you know some of the pressure I'm under here by telling you a little bit about what John Heberger wrote to me just a week or two before my talk. He said, and I think he asks this of other people besides me. He said, do you know of another place on Earth that has experienced and can demonstrate more geological events and processes that combined to create it than in Wyoming? The northwest part of the state alone, now why would he focus on the northwest part of the state alone, preserves the likely earliest Himalayan-style continental collision event that you and others have documented, yay, through the breakup of Rodinia to a continental scale erosion event at the base of the Cambrian to nearly 500 million years of relatively near sea level deposition and erosion to the Severe, to the Laramie, to the Absarica volcanic episode, to continental scale uplift that occurred in the late Miocene, to the advent of the Yellowstone system, the Basin and Range extension, and alpine and quasi-continental style glacial episodes. It's a long list and it's all evident right here. Now, unfortunately, that pretty much is my whole talk. But I will try to start with that beautiful summarization of geologic assets here in Wyoming and add something of value. So actually, usually when I give talks, they're research talks, and this is completely different. What I'd like to do is look at Wyoming's geologic heritage and argue that geoheritage can be an effective way to enrich our relationship with the landscape and deepen our appreciation for the earth and all it provides. And it's a way of sharing that with other people. So now let me see if I can master the challenge of sharing my screen. All right, how are we doing? Okay, terrific. So what is geoheritage anyway? So if we take this word apart, of course, geo refers to the earth, and heritage has to do with something that's passed down to us, something that we get by tradition or as background as a result of our situation. That could be our natural situation in the case of geoheritage. So I think of geologic heritage, geoheritage for short, as our relationship with the landscape. Now, there are many different ways that we connect with the earth, and we bring many dimensions, and it has different kinds of value to us. So I'd like to use this picture on the screen as an example to illustrate the different kinds of value that geoheritage have. This picture obviously is of a place near me, and you probably recognize it. And I think because we are on Zoom, I'm probably not supposed to invite participation from the audience. So I will just have to say, of course, you recognize this as the landscape between Laramie and Cheyenne along I-80, right? And there's this beautiful short grass prairie. Of course, your eyes are drawn immediately to the rocks, but you also notice that there is a pyramid and some telephone poles. All this is part of geoheritage. Now, when I look at this landscape, of course, I see it as a geologist, so I see the scientific value here. I look at that beautiful rosy red rock, and I say, oh, I had a wonderful time studying this. It's the Sherman batholith, the Sherman Granite. So in the picture on the left, you can see a map of the bedrock geology of the Laramie Mountains. You can see Laramie. Let's see if I have an arrow I can use. Here's Laramie, and here is I-80 going across towards Cheyenne. And everything in red here goes from below the Wyoming boundary into Colorado up north, almost all the way to the road that goes from Bosler to Wheatland. So all the red is this granite that you see in the picture. Now, you may think granite is just granite. I think I thought granite was just granite for the longest time. What is it? It's quartz and two feldspars, but this particular granite is really special. It's a little bit pinker than the granites you would see if you went to California and you looked at the Sierra Nevada batholith, for example. And the other thing about this granite is there is a lot of it, except in a few places where it's mixed with this dark rock, this iron-rich basalt. So it occurs in a bimodal suite, dark rocks and pink rocks. And this is quite interesting to me. I should say that these rocks are 1.4 billion years old. So these have been solid for a long, long time. But if you look around our state to try to find a place that has similar granite, you won't quite find granite, but you will go to Yellowstone, where you have eruptions of rhyolite and basalt. It's that same bimodal suite. And these rocks are the same composition. So when you next go to Yellowstone and you go across the Snake River Plain, you should say to yourself, oh, that iron-rich basalt, that is just about the same as what you could find outside of Laramie. And when you look at the rhyolites, the obsidians and the altered rhyolites of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, that's the same kind of rock. And when that magma system cools and the magma chamber below Yellowstone solidifies, it will look just like the rocks of the Sherman batholith. So when I go across from Laramie to Cheyenne, I say to myself, this is Yellowstone underground. So doesn't that add to your appreciation for this landscape? So that's the kind of value it can have for educating and for scientific. Yes.
I know I'm asking you to digress. Don't have many people here have heard about the Yellowstone caldera. Is there any new thinking on that? Is it still gurgling, still likely to reappear? Is it a subject that you're really curious about?
Okay, so the question is about the Yellowstone caldera, and is it still active? And I would say, yes, it is. Is it in imminent danger of eruption? I would say, no, it is not. But if you look at the geophysical imaging of the caldera, the depth at which that magma chamber lies is at about the same depth as this Sherman granite solidified, about 10 to 15 kilometers depth. So I think it's a really good analog. Okay, now I'm going to go on, because there are all sorts of different ways you can look at a landscape, and that we'll use this one as an example again. So what about the economic value of a landscape? This is without question an important transportation corridor, for example. So here is a photograph that is taken from the air looking east down toward Cheyenne. So you see that triangular wedge of sediment lapping up onto the Sherman granite, and you see the train tracks and you see I-80. And of course, that little wedge is called the gangplank. And why is it there? It's because I have something showing up in the way here. Okay, it's because the sediments that got pushed up as the mountains were uplifted stood pretty much on end, but they were covered up by later horizontal sediments, and that made a nice ramp. Now the ramp has eroded away in most places, but not right in this particular place. So it made the perfect location for the train and all sorts of people, but right now it's mainly the interstate and the train. So, you know, we appreciate the landscape for its economic value. In other places, the value would be minerals, right? Or some other kind of economic value. All right, now I like history. So I like to think about the historical value of a place. And because I'm a geologist, I tend to think of the history of geology. So I think of the people who first set out on the geologic expeditions of surveying the territories in about 1870, getting on the train in Omaha, coming across the plains, thinking, when am I going to get to some decent rock? And this would be the first that they found. And the expedition that came across this part of the West was led by F.V. Hayden. I'm sure many of you know far more about the Hayden expedition than I do. But you know that he had to always be thinking of how to get enough money for the next expedition. So you may think that maybe he is expressing himself a little bit optimistically when you read that he just gushed about the Sherman granite. Oh, it was far nicer than the granites back in Massachusetts, more elegant, having a brighter color. Well, I kind of agree with him. Now, another person who was involved in this landscape, who's a real favorite of mine. Oh, I should say, Hayden, as I said, had to go get money for the next year. He was really smart. He brought a photographer, an engraver. He really played up in his reports all the wonderful aspects of what he found. And so the photographer, William Henry Jackson, did wonderful pictures. And this picture, Reed's Rock, is the same one in the photograph. And that's the rock they used to build that monument. And what is that monument representing? It's representing the high point on the Transcontinental Railroad. It's dedicated to the two men who financed it, Oliver and Oakes Ames. And they hauled the rock from Reed's Rock a half a mile on sledges and then hoisted it up with wooden scaffolding to build that pyramid. Yeah, the Ames Monument, right. Okay, well then, there were a few people who looked at these rocks, but the first person who took a really systematic look was this young woman, Catherine Fowler Billings. And she was born in 1902 in Boston to a very proper Boston family, but her father died pretty young and she was a real rebel. And she decided she was going to be a geologist. Well, nobody who was a woman was a geologist, but she went to Bryn Mawr, where there was a woman, the first member of the Geological Society of America, who taught geology. She majored in geology, and then she had to figure out where was she going to go to field camp. And what's the answer? Why did people come to Wyoming? Because women were allowed to participate. So she came out to field camp in 1927, and she loved it, and she decided that she would do her PhD mapping the Laramie Mountains. So there were no topographic maps. So she had to first do all the surveying, and then she mapped all the geology for 525 square miles. Just amazing. Well, she was a real tomboy. And as I say, her father died young. So her mother was at home in Boston, and she sent her mother a photograph of her in the field. Her mother probably just about had a heart attack. In any case, she died only a few months later. Catherine Fowler showed me this picture, and I turned it over on the back, and she had written, "Mother, just look at your daughter now." Anyway, I called her some 65 years after she did her mapping and asked her questions. And she was kind of, oh, that was so long ago, I'll have to write it down. And she did. She wrote a book about her life. And a lot of it was about working in the Laramie Range, which she said was the hardest work she ever did, even though she worked in Africa and all kinds of difficult places. And before she died, she sent me this necklace, which is made of labradorite, which is part of what she mapped in the Laramie Range. This labradorite she bought in London. But anyway, I was really touched that she gave it to me. And now I have to find somebody to give it to next. So again, I look at this landscape and it has all kinds of associations for me. There's also a lot of other kinds of cultural value to a place. For instance, if you look at this map of Wyoming and you see all the native trails and historic trails that are on this map, you'll notice that down in the southeast corner, there are a few dotted lines, and these represent trails that were still used by the Cheyenne Indians across the Laramie Mountains, just where I-80 is now. And these were known to be used in about 1850 when the Stansbury expedition came through and documented that. The Arapaho were also active in this area, and a lot of the names in this area come from Arapaho. So Lodgepole Creek, basically in Arapaho, is called Teepee Pole River, and the Laramie Mountains were called the place where teepee poles are obtained. Some of you know Vidavoo, the place where the rock formations are, and that word is a corruption for the Arapaho Bituwu, which means from the earth, which is very nice. Okay, we can also look at how people use the land for recreation, you know, running and hiking and camping and climbing and skiing. This is, I think, how most people interact with this part of Wyoming. And then finally, you know, a lot of our country has real aesthetic value. Now, some of it's a bit on the subtle side. Maybe maybe not everybody will be impressed with this view, which I took out the window of the train as it went from Laramie to Cheyenne. And I have to tell you the story of a geologist named Archibald Geikie, who had read the Hayden report, and in 1880, he wanted to come out to the US to see the Rocky Mountains, to see the Grand Canyon. And he was especially excited about the Rocky Mountains, because of course he knew the Alps. And so he got on the train, he went up and up and up, and then he got to where the Ames Monument is. The train passes just north of that to the ghost town of Sherman. And there was a sign, and it said, "Crest of the Rocky Mountains." And here's what he wrote in a book. "One looks around with a feeling of incredulity for the peaks and crests that ought to have been there. Instead, there are numerous quaint knobs of pink granite." Not so impressed. But you know, you and I would see such green in this picture. Okay, so what you get the idea of is that geoheritage encompasses all kinds of different aspects and ways of appreciating the landscape. And it's becoming a movement. It's in its juvenile stage, but the Geological Society of America has put together a statement trying to define it. And they say a lot of the things that we've talked about so far, that it's a generic term that we apply to areas that have geologic features, that have scientific or educational value, cultural, including historical, or recreational or aesthetic value. Then GSA adds, they serve public interest, critical to advancing knowledge about natural hazards, groundwater supply, soils processes, climate and environmental changes, evolution of life, energy and mineral supplies, and other aspects about the nature of the earth. In other words, they see that geoheritage is kind of the way of catching people or capturing people's interest and leading them to have a greater appreciation. And I think that's what we want to do. So I would summarize all this to say that geoheritage is the connection between people and landscape and earth history. What we would like to do, or what I would like to do if I am trying to promote geoheritage, is make sure that people enjoy nature, enjoy and understand the earth system, the evolution of the landforms that they see, and the origin of the resources that we all use. And ideally, then that will really deepen connections of people with the planet that they live on. And just as in the picture I showed, which had telephone poles and a pyramid, I think it's important to emphasize that geoheritage sites aren't parks. You know, they're not just these pristine preserved places. They're really often collages of public and private land. They may be places where there can be economic development. And very often they're places that have features that are interesting to visitors. Now, there's actually a geoheritage movement, and it's really strong in Europe and in China. There is a global geoparks network even that has been designated by this International Union of Geological Sciences. It's part of UNESCO, so part of the United Nations. And there aren't any US geoparks because we do not pay dues to UNESCO. That doesn't mean we can't learn from the movement and figure out ways to use the same principles. But for instance, if you look on the UNESCO site, you'll see these beautiful places like this karst topography in China. And China has designated this area as a geopark, and it's developed a lot of tourist opportunities there, which have spurred a lot of local economic development. So on the UNESCO website, it says things like this, you know, that they think of geoparks as places. I'm going to propose something a little different. And they're a place where we can protect and also promote economic development. They are supposed to be places where we can develop our local sense of pride. We can create new industries, new jobs, and ideally, this is all up to the local people. Okay, so that's UNESCO So how might we translate this to Wyoming? First, there you can see no dots, not only not in Wyoming, but none in the United States. So when I said they were mainly in Europe and China, now you can see on this map, which is the most recent version, where they are. Okay, so what can we do in Wyoming? I think we definitely could do a lot with our residents of this state, you know, deepening their appreciation and sense of place where we all live. You know, we identify with this landscape, but none of us knows all the stories behind it. So we have a lot of opportunities. Potentially this could promote tourism. We know we have a state that has budget issues. And so we've got an industry here that provides 10% of all of our jobs. There was nearly $4 billion in overnight tourist spending before the pandemic. It's actually come back incredibly well. But as you know, you are the destination, right? It's far and away more tourist development here in Teton County. Here it's $1 billion in 2019. Then Park County is second, and they've only got a third of the activity that you do. And then all the other counties are way down the list. I mean, Albany County, I think, has $40 million on this table of 2019 tourist spending. That's where I am, of course. And so geoheritage can always give people new reasons to visit Yellowstone and the Tetons, but it can also include reasons why they should venture beyond. So here's my thought. Everybody talks about geoparks or geoheritage sites. Why should we be confined to sites? You know, we like to travel. What do geologists do? They take field trips. What do retired people do? They do Rhodes Scholars. So we should think not just about places, but trips. The other thing is, you know, we love stories. Lots of us belong to book clubs, read lots of books. So I'm thinking about taking a popular book and then providing the geoheritage context for it. Okay, and you can see on the back of the slide, there's old Teddy Roosevelt enjoying his travel between Cheyenne and Laramie by horseback in 1903. That's what we all want to do. And he's going right by the Sherman Granite, by the way. I bet he didn't know it. So here's the proposal. We all know the book, Rising from the Plains by John McPhee, where John McPhee, the author here, takes trips with Dave Love, and he also uses the journals of Dave Love's mother, Ethel Waxham, to take us through the state and explain the geologic significance of places using just beautiful prose, really evocative. John McPhee doesn't do anything except carefully, and everything he writes is beautifully structured. I don't know if this is how he thinks he structured this book, but when I read it, what I see is three parts. First, he's traveling down I-80 with Dave Love. He is telling us about the trip that Dave Love's mother took from Rawlins by stagecoach towards Lander. So the geology is shaping the journey. That's the first part of the book. Then he spends the next part talking about Dave Love's boyhood and describing that central part of Wyoming where he grew up. And this is a photograph of the Love Ranch House as of 2 years ago when I was last there. It's definitely falling apart and it's pretty darn bleak. So as far as the aesthetic value of geoheritage, we're gonna have a lot of work to do. And then finally, the last part of the book takes place in this area. And he is with Dave Love and he's learning all about all the rocks, and he kind of puts together the history of the place. And it's where Dave is really philosophical about the impact that our activities have had on the planet.
Now, where is the ranch?
So the ranch is absolutely in the middle of the state. So it's near the Gas Hills between basically Riverton and Casper and Jeffrey City, if you drew a triangle there. It's pretty well not much. Yeah. Okay, so if I were to do a geologic companion to this book, first I'm going to need some help. So I'm hoping to get some ideas here and also on the chat to John, and I'll prompt you a little later here. But I think we can do 5 parts. So you can see the, I-80 is kind of a long trek, so we'll break it in half and do east and west. The yellow line is the stage route from Rollins to Lander that his mother took in 1905 when she came out to rural Wyoming as a school teacher. Let's see, I clicked by accident. Whoa. And then the last part, it takes place in Jackson Hole in Yellowstone. All right, so what I'll do is I'll just give you an example of what I'm thinking about, and I do need help with the details. So we'll look at this part 3, the trek from Rollins to Lander. And this is, for each part, I have in mind maybe 10 stops. We'll take people on a tour of 10 stops. So you have to start in Rollins at Rollins Spring and go north towards Lander through all these places. Now, 4 of these places are italicized because I'm going to just give you a for example, the kinds of things that you could point out at these places. So the site, what it is geologically, and then what kind of value it has. And then of course you see I have an asterisk here under geoheritage value. All have historical, aesthetic, and scientific value. Well, not everybody's going to agree with the aesthetic. Okay, so let's take, for example, when you go north from Rollins on it's 287, you kind of go towards this big old separation flats, right? It used to be the place where there were more car crashes than anywhere else in Wyoming because everybody was so eager to get through there that they would take terrible risks. Well, about 14 miles north of Rollins, the road goes down a big hill. And if you get to the bottom and you turn around, you see this landscape. And McPhee writes that as Ethel Waxham went down it in the stagecoach and then looked back, the whole of the Mesozoic era rose to view. Miss Waxham had no idea then that she was looking at 175 million years, let alone which 175 million. Well, here's an opportunity, right? So I put on the photograph the geologic abbreviation for the different time periods of the rocks. We could show the same view in a block diagram like this, where, Cretaceous is abbreviated with a K. You can see it here, Jurassic with a J, and so forth, and let people know which 175 million years it was. The other quote that really grabs me from this part of the book is what Ethel Waxham wrote in her journal. She said, "Mountains were far ahead of us, a range rising from the plains." Of course, that's the title of the book. But McPhee comments, in one sentence, Miss Waxham had intuitively written their geologic history, for they had indeed come from the plains. How did they come from the plains? Laramie block uplifts. What an opportunity. So we can show the geologic map. Here's Rollins, here's this Bell Springs fault. You go past and down onto the flats, you turn around and look back. We can point out, for instance, that geologic maps always use the same colors for the same age rocks. So you see this, kind of yucky green Cretaceous here matches the yucky green over here, and so forth. And then we can also use diagrams like this to show how the Rollins uplift came up, the Basin involved, and the Bell Springs fault that she crossed on the north side is kind of the scissors north end of that uplift. So you kind of get the idea. What happens next? Poor Ethel goes down that hill and she goes across this huge flat, separation flats. The stage rolled onto separation flats, altitude 7,000 feet. still pursuing chimeric mountains. In the far distance appeared a white speck, a roadhouse, which they watched impatiently for hours. Well, here in this yellow line in this map is the Stagecoach Route, and it's not exactly how the highway goes today. So she started in Rawlins, and then she crossed Bell Springs, and then she was headed towards this stage station at Bull Springs. This is what that looked like. And it was described as the most desolate setting imaginable. And I have to read you what Ethel said in her journal about going into this roadhouse. In the cluttered kitchen, a fat, forlorn, silent woman served us wearily. We ate our baked potatoes and giant biscuits, onions and carrots, and canned apple pie in half silence, glad to be through. Now, also on this map, there's a black line, and in the middle it says GDB. That's for Great Divide Basin. So when Ethel was going across on the stagecoach across this basin, she was in this large internally drained topographic depression, and of course no streams leave. They're just ephemeral streams and playas in the middle. And it's very low precipitation, very arid. It also is very windy. That's part of the reason that the stage station seems so horribly forlorn. And the average miles per hour of the wind there range between 15 and 23, depending on the season. And of course, that created the wind to make huge dune fields. And this place would be an opportunity to talk about how these dunes have been forming for thousands of years. And really, there's not much change evident in the dune deposits since the Ice Age. And then finally, here's our economic aspect, right? That's the wind that powers all the wind turbines that now give us at least a capacity of 736 megawatts, just downstream from this point. Then the stage goes on to Lost Soldier. And McPhee comments that Ethel Waxham, going across the rocks and sediments, had no idea that the sediments 2,000 and 3,000 feet below contained prolific traps of gas and oil. Actually, nobody knew that. Discovery was 20 years away. Actually, I think it was more like 10 years away. This area is called a Sheepherder Anticline in theory because it's such an obvious structure that even a shepherd could find it. But McPhee said that it was one that could be mapped by a Princeton geologist dressed as a sheepherder. And it claims that's what he did. So this Lost Soldier oil field is pretty large, and it's pretty unusual, I think, because when you drill down through the sedimentary column, you find oil in all kinds of places, in the Flathead, the Madison, the Ten Sleep, the Chugwater, the Morrison, Sundance, Nugget, and also some of the Cretaceous formations. McPhee said, a well at Lost Soldier was like grafted ornamental citrus, oranges, lemons, tangerines, grapefruit, all on a single tree. Hard to beat that description. But you can see this in this pie diagram, the different reservoirs for oil in this area. I should say that what's the town called? Bear Oil. This field was discovered by Bear Oil Company. And if you look at the production, now I see I can't spell field, but if you look at the production diagram, you'll see that it declined dramatically through the 80s and then was boosted a couple of times. And this gives us an opportunity to talk about the role of technological innovation in oil production, because the first bump there is when they learned to water flood fields and push out a little bit more oil. And the second is when CO2 injection began. All right, this is the last one. Crook's Gap. Crook's Gap is an interesting little place. By the time the stagecoach taking Ethel Waxham got here, it was dark. So McPhee writes, as the stage moved on to Crook's Gap, the bright starlight fell on fields of giant boulders, black and silver in relief. Smaller ones among them, recognized by no one then, were jade. Now, in our tour, we're going to have to take people through Muddy Gap and around. And so we will already have talked to them about the fact that the granite mountains are in a big robin that's been downdropped. And the jade is in the granite mountains, and it was shed off. And that's how the boulders ended up in Crook's Gap. So this little place has the jade rush, it has an oil rush and a uranium rush. The jade boulders apparently in the 40s were incredible. Some of them really large, like in this picture from Dave Love's collection where you've got somebody's hat sitting on this boulder of jade. And of course, jade's our official state gemstone. This area, so here on this map, you have to drive now on the paved road through Jeffrey City. You have to get off and go south to get to Crook's Gap. And there are two little oil fields, one on each side of the little gravel road, and they actually tap different reservoirs. And you can see again that oil production's declined a lot, but they're still producing. The big thing today is the uranium, which is originally was surface mined, and that's why Jeffrey City was a boom town. It was during the uranium boom, but now we don't have surface mining in this area anymore. It's all from in situ, underground recovery. So fluids, oxidizing fluids are pumped in, the uranium dissolved and then brought up. And so right now, as of last month, there are a lot of licensed area sites that UR Energy has got. They think they have a mine life of 12 to 15 years. You know, this is a roller coaster industry. It all depends on the price, but this is a really important area and a good place for highlighting uranium production for our geologic companion. Okay, so you're probably thinking, okay, this is great, but what does McPhee think of this? And that's an excellent question because this is definitely a derivative project. Well, thankfully, my husband nominated him for an honorary degree at UW and he got it. And so he came out in 2016. And so I had met him so I could write to him. And he is very gracious. And he said, I am rewarded times over. I do not believe this, but he's very nice about agreeing that this could be a use for his book. And his publisher has also agreed to let me use the quotations from the book, which is another thing you have to have. So now the gun, the gun's pointing at me, right? I've got to figure out what to do and how to do it. And so I wanted to talk to you all about one of the big problem areas, and that is, what do we do about the fifth section that has to do with Jackson Hole and Yellowstone? So first I wrote to McPhee. I said, well, how does this part of the book work? And he said, well, I made it a U shape, starting here and now and going around, collecting rock and developing everything I needed back to Precambrian time. Then in an orderly way, I went up section from the Precambrian through to the Phanerozoic. Maybe you can shape something out of that, he said. Well, what do we do? So I can think of themes like these on the right, everything that goes from the Precambrian to pretty much the present day. But I need experts like you who know the places where you would take people. They need to be places where the public can go, right? It can't really be on private land. They need to be places where you can see things reasonably well. So if you would please kind of cogitate on this question about where you would want to take somebody in this area to maybe highlight some of these features or others. We'll come back to this. So that's what we'll work on next. But one last thing, and that is the, I'm old. And so I think of, oh, I would love to do a book. But maybe books are not what people want these days, So if you were somebody doing one of these trips, how would you like the information to be presented? Do you want a booklet? Or if you're driving, does it need to be audio? Or did you want it on your phone? Or would you rather go to a website and download something? What would be the best strategy?
All of the above.
Now,
it depends on the age level, for people like us, the book is great, or an audio thing as you travel.
yeah, okay. So my husband Eric is taking notes. So we've heard book and we've heard audio, and maybe we'll discuss more when we can get everybody who's on the chat as well. So let me just summarize, and then I would love to talk about this. I guess I'm hoping you'll at least think this is a good idea and worth pursuing. But the bottom line is I think that, Wyoming really has geoheritage writ large, and this is really something we can build on. It's really a way to develop the connections we feel with our place. And we can take advantage of all the stories that we like about, people in the past and people who are doing things now, and involve our participants, our field trip participants. And ideally, this will increase interest and understanding of Wyoming's geoheritage, and ideally stewardship of the earth more broadly. Now, what I've described is just one possibility. And so I certainly hope that, others of you will be inspired to do other kinds of things. I mean, we could have a Wyoming Geoheritage website where all these things that we create are available. Okay, so let's discuss. I'll just leave this slide up here. And do I get to take questions from the audience first, or do we take them from the chat? How should we do it?
Here first.
Okay, then, yes.
A year or two ago, and John will remember when, our geology club did a local tour. And that would give you an initial map to begin with, because we stopped at various places like the Grohunt Slide and the Cathedral Group Drive Out. The Snake River Overlook. I mean, they're all very popular tourist drive outs. And John and the others would have that schedule, and that would give you the whole floor plan to do it.
That sounds great. Okay, so it's just been suggested that the local geology group did a field trip guide throughout the Jackson Hole area. And it sounds like lots of the places on that trip, including Grohunt Slide and Snake River Overlook, those are all perfect for places to stop to highlight some of these themes. Jenny Lake.
Drive out, and they all have, they feature the glaciers and the potholes and, all the geologic features.
Okay, you may have made my job a lot easier. Beverly.
I used to drive back and forth across Wyoming a lot on different routes, for climbing. And to me, the rest of Wyoming has a lot to offer, and that's the places that people aren't so aware of. Everybody knows Jackson Hole, and there's lots of travel logs for this area, and we have lots of tourists already. I would hope the project would draw people across Wyoming, and I don't know how that would fit in with David Love's and John McPhee's route. That's just one route. Yeah. But there's a lot to be offered in the rest of Wyoming, and they're the ones that need tourism.
Right. So the very apt comment is that the parts of Wyoming that really need the tourism and the development are everywhere except the Tetons and Yellowstone. Absolutely right. You don't need more tourists. Okay.
Oh, they're very good places.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Black Hills and the Muddy Gap area.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. You sir.
I would start with a phone app.
A
that
phone
had
app.
GPS locations that people could drive to. And then I would have signage on the side of the road. Now they did a lot of this in Scotland, a lot of signage on the road. And then at that point, you could, given you had a cell tower, you could go to a website and get more detail about that location. And then you could, when you get home, go to the website and download PDFs that you would like.
That sounds great. So we're hearing about, did all this happen with your trip to Scotland?
No, we didn't have all that.
Oh, okay. So the recommendation is to, do a phone app and signs, and then be able to go back to a website to download PDFs. Yeah.
So just for your information, there's a local entrepreneur here in Jackson. Her name is Story Clark.
Yep.
And she has created this app called
Travel Stories.
Right.
Yeah.
And this could be a module of that, because there's a lot of technology development that has to go into that. And you could shortcut all that by partnering with her.
Yeah. Can you use it off the grid?
But you need a cell tower.
I think, yeah, but still, that's a great idea. So Travel Stories is one example of a great app. All right, let's go way back.
Yeah, I think actually the National Park Service in Big Bend, they were piloting a similar deal to what Story's doing. And you just downloaded it, and then it was attached to your GPS. And so you didn't have to be in cell service to get any of the information. It was just all on there.
Great thought.
Super neat. Like,
So
it would just turn on when you were passing a certain feature, and it would tell you about it, and then the radio would come out on, or whatever.
Wow.
Whatever you had, whatever, and then you move along.
okay.
Use the next.
Yeah, so this comment was to go to look at what Big Bend did, where you have a downloadable app that matches with your GPS, and so then it will start talking to you when you get to the right places. That sounds great. Yes.
If you're going to include places that may or may not be geologically interesting, but maybe socially interesting, do you know the story of the Ames Monument?
So this is a question about saying the story behind the Ames Monument. So the building of it, or the people? Yeah. Well, so one of the two who was honored with this pyramid was censured by Congress and convicted of fraud, right?
That I didn't know.
Oh.
But I know that they were involved with making implements, shovels and picks for the railroad company, because that was all dug by hand.
Yeah, they didn't have tractors or that. They did it all by shovel.
And so they made a lot of money doing that, and they built the monument. And today you can go down to the hardware store and buy an Ames shovel.
Hey, that's a great aspect. So this is adding to the kind of the economic aspects of landscape, pointing out that the Ames Monument honors people who were involved in making shovels and picks, and you can still buy them today.
That's my take on it, but please.
I will look it up. I will check. Yes.
Just to change themes here a little bit, in addition to doing book-based themes, I'd be really interested in the Native Americans of the area and some of the trails that you showed, and how they interacted with the landscape, which was much more natural maybe than how we do. I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, really good comment of looking into the indigenous people and how they use the landscape, and really investigating that and bringing that to our attention.
And the pathways they used, the trails that they used.
Yeah, okay, because you could go along trails used by
why was that trail there?
Those people. Yeah. Good idea. Yes.
Different subject. I may have missed it. McGinnis Hill, Jeffrey City, is there economically sufficient uranium there that can be economically recovered? It's a viable asset.
Well, so the question is the uranium near Jeffrey City really a viable asset? And the question is, right now, I would say it's pretty iffy. It's kind of an artificial market because of the stockpiling of uranium by governments, and the price is very hard to predict. I mean, it's gone up a little bit recently, and so there's all sorts of newfound enthusiasm, but how long it will last, I don't know. And so this, this estimate that UR Energy has a mine life of 12 to 15 years, I mean, that may be plus or minus 15 years. Yes.
Following along with what her comments were, there's a local fellow who's 90 something now, Ken Thomas. And he has done amazing research on the Indians and has written many books about Sacagawea and the other Indians and their roles in taking the pioneers through here and developing the trails and all that. And this lives 4 miles up the road.
Ken Thomas, Eric? Yeah, that's a wonderful resource, and we need to take advantage of these while we can. Yeah. Yes.
Some of the areas that are supposedly devoid looking, supposedly uninteresting, I think a way to grasp attention to those is to point out how geology is the connection with botany and habitat for wildlife. Nothing is empty. And the sagebrush grass steppe is particularly important and rich in wildlife and birds and whatnot.
Yeah, it's an excellent point that just because maybe the average person from New Jersey may not see much of value in part of our landscape, when it comes down to it, everything comes from the earth, and that means the soil and the plants and the animals, and so we need to emphasize those connections.
There's so many layers. You're going to be busy.
Yeah, well, but you are helping.
A couple of grad students.
You're right.
If you're including Jackson Hole, a place that's not overrun by tourists, and you get a good view of the stories that go up the tram.
Oh,
and like when the governors met here, that's the trip they took.
Yeah.
And we had a geologist explain it, and their kids have gone up and done the geology there, because besides what you see right under the tram, you get a view of the Laramie and the severe crusting, the glaciers, it's all right up there. And the great thing about the tram, it's not overrun by tourists. So
excellent. Excellent idea to use the tram and have a stop at the top. Really, where you can see so much of the geology. Thank you. I wouldn't have thought of that. It's great.
Put that on a GPS, so instead of driving.
Right. We'll have to make the directions clear. Yeah. Do we have chat comments?
I have a couple of comments and our questions. So you're going to have to repeat these because I'm sure they can't hear me. But one comment was look for a phone app, look for a CD, then a car that narrates the tour. And then there was a comment that Professor Gunther over at CWC, very involved in historical and anthropological.
Okay, so phone apps and CDs and taking advantage of Dr. Gunther at CWC for a lot of information.
Then there was a comment, how do we keep the tourists away?
Yeah, well, so I was trying to be diplomatic, and I'd say that we can deepen understanding here while bringing people to the other parts of the state, but it's sounding like you'd be perfectly happy if we just took them to other parts of the state.
Promote the Caldera.
Well, I think your example of the Love's Mother, the geology along that, I thought that was fascinating. And that, I mean, nobody goes there.
Right.
And you can really play that up.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Red Desert.
Yes, that's right.
There is
Red Desert.
Several eco tour or whatever you want to call them, companies in town, and some of them have a little guide thing that tells you what you're seeing as you're driving around, and that's what you're talking about.
I think it might be travel stories.
Okay, so other people, other companies using travel stories. Yeah.
Well, it's common in many areas, like the Utah parks. You can get, in fact, I think we used to have these available here in town, maybe they still are, and it was a cassette, because we didn't, record the CD, but you can just plug it in and it would tell you as you're driving along, you're looking on your left now is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so the audio tape is really attractive. Yeah, you know, when I was an undergraduate, of course, you come out to do field camp. And I remember being so impressed by Wyoming because they had those brown signs that would say, you know, flathead sandstone, 545 million years. And it's just such a simple thing as that. So I probably need to remember that simplicity is also effective.
I'm sure showing it from Mockler.
Yeah, Wind River Canyon. Yeah, and all those signs.
Yellowstone has an initiative to do more with connectivity things and iPhones for explaining what things are. And I don't really know what their program is, but they're really pushing that.
So I should look at what Yellowstone Park is doing.
Yeah, go to the Craig Thomas Museum and see what they're selling up there.
And see what the museum is selling. Yeah, good idea. Good idea.
I think on the phone app, you've got to be able to download it so you can work without talking to a cell tower.
Okay.
Our cell system here,
yeah, not
it's got designed for 20,000 people, and we're getting 20, 30, 40,000 a day. And the cell service just falls apart.
Oh, so yeah, so this is a very strong reminder, I'm saying it to the Zoom people, that we really need to have anything that we produce for phone use to be downloadable, so we're not reliant on cell service. Yeah, I mean, if you'd be lost in separation flats if you had to have cell service. Yes.
I have a last comment on the format. I think phone app is a great idea. The goal, and I like looking at flex diagram. And so I think it would be awesome that within the phone app, if you had an audio file, yes, that you could also then, if you wanted to download the PDF, then you could put on the look at what the audio is talking about, so that you can visually be reminded of all of the geologic units.
Yeah. Yeah, very good reminder that audio alone doesn't quite do it. Yeah, you've got to be able to see the pictures and see the stratigraphy, and the diagrams. Right, right.
There's a comment from the Zoom audience that they can't hear the question.
Okay, I'll try to do better at summarizing what the conversation is in this room, but we just had a big conversation about how we really need to be able to see the pictures, and so audio alone doesn't quite hack it. Yeah.
And there was a reiteration of the comment from here about the cell service.
Yeah. Okay, and again, we're reminded, yes, we cannot rely on cell service in this state. So whatever we do, can't use that. Yeah. Well, look, I'm conscious of the time that I've taken, probably more than my allotted time, but I can't thank you enough for your enthusiastic help and helping me push off the starting blocks here and get moving. So I really, really appreciate it. And it's been a lot of fun to see all of you and hear all your great suggestions. Thank you so much.